This is an incredible turnout for Fellowship of Freethought, or is this the entire DFW Corps? Now, when I got started in activism, it was largely because of my wife. When I got involved with her, she had me doing a number of things that I had never done before. One of them was standing on the steps of the state capitol, holding a picket sign. And the other one was voting. I had actually never voted until I became involved with her, and I was never terribly interested in politics. And I noticed there's a whole lot of people that are that way, and we fight this kind of apathy a lot. You know, people that don't want to vote and don't want to control a situation, or they only vote for the president, and they don't realize that everybody else that was elected in the midterms, when there's low voter turnout, are going to put up a wall for anything your president could have done anything about. So, when we got started doing the activism, I was primarily interested in creationism and fighting the creationists. And of course, you remember there was the dentist that said that he needed to stand up to experts in referring to 150 experts testifying on science. And I'm still interested in beating down creationism, but there are other avenues. The Board of Education has, as you know, attacked sex education. I bring this up everywhere. We have abstinence-only sex education, which means we have no sex education, and that's why Texas has I think we still have, the highest rate of repeat teen pregnancies. Just to let you know what a disastrous situation that is. I probably should have put notes in front of me so I can remember everything. Don't you hate when that happens? But what they're doing now, and we're going to be talking about environment, or I'm going to start talking about environmental issues in the coming months, because that's a huge thing that they're trying to, they have a doctrine, that they can't admit global warming, or that they can't admit that global warming is anthropocentric, or however they want to phrase it. Because if it's caused by humans, then that means that we're responsible for it, that we need to do something about it, and nobody wants to do anything about it, especially when you're talking about something that is so gravely serious as that. Remember that religion, to a large degree, at least certainly Western religion, and the way that we see prosperity gospel is primarily centered on denial of responsibility, so that you don't have to atone for anything. You can just pretend that your magic imaginary friend has forgiven you for whatever you should have atoned for. You don't actually have to help anybody. You can just wish upon a star that they'll get the help that they need. And anytime you do something grievous, you can say that Jesus has forgiven you and just go about your day and avoid criminal prosecution that way, as we've seen in the news recently. But one of the things that the Board of Education is wanting to change now is history. And I mean literally changing history. And of course, I've been doing this for years. One of the things, the first picket sign that I ever held on the steps of the state capitol was that history is not always right, and history is not always white. Because the two things that they've been doing is they want to promote American exceptionalism. And I've actually heard it said in the halls where they meet that they don't want to tell students anything that was disparaging or embarrassing about American history. They want the United States to be seen as a shining example of what it means to be God-blessed. So they have eliminated certain portions of history, and they have cleaned up or rephrased or spun other parts of history. For example, history books now say that the Trail of Tears brought many Indians to Christ. Isn't that a horrible way to sell that? That to me was one of the worst things the United States ever did. And it was also done by our very first Trinitarian Christian president. And that, of course, goes against what the history books are teaching too. The history books now, these are the books that were approved. They say that, that the slaves, for example, they used Christianity not to promote slavery, which is what it did, but they used Christianity as sort of an escape from slavery instead. They have people that are saying in our history books that slavery was, or that activists at the time were saying that slavery was inconsistent with Christianity. At the same time, they also wanted to promote the President of the Confederate States of America, Jefferson Davis. They wanted to put him on equal footing with Abraham Lincoln. And I kind of wish that they'd actually been able to do that because, of course, he argued that slavery was moral because there's not a word said against it in the Bible, and there was quite a bit in there to promote it. So, and I had some notes here, but my computer's decided to do Windows updates. I hate that. All right, so the history books that they actually approved say that, well, they've changed slavery. They changed the phrasing of where it says, where it used to say Atlantic slave trade. They've now changed it to Atlantic triangular trade. So they've removed virtually every mention of slavery, and they've even said, in one of the textbooks it says, and we're talking about the leading textbooks, McGraw-Hill, and Holt, oh God, I can't remember the name. I think so. So the leading textbooks said that the Confederate States, cited as their reason for secession states' rights, even though states' rights wasn't even mentioned in most or any of the reasons for the state secessions. And every state that seceded cited slavery as the reason, in order to preserve the institution of slavery. And I don't know why they try to sell it like this, like America never did anything wrong, right? Like that we never promoted slavery. I don't know why they're trying to change history like that. We've had people on the Board of Education who, not everybody is voting as a bloc. There are people in opposition. One of them, Helen Berlanga, Hispanic she left. She stormed out of one of the meetings when they had removed all ethnic references. And they tried to get rid of Thurgood Marshall. They tried to get rid of Cesar Chavez. They did successfully remove a whole bunch of other people. And she stormed out complaining that our history was not always white. So we are being literally whitewashed. One of my favorite examples that I heard was Don McLeroy mentioned that one of the textbooks had a notice or a mention of hip-hop music. And so he had that changed to country and western. Because everything had to reflect white, redneck, Protestant Christian culture. And so they couldn't have anything that was endorsing anybody else or even acknowledging anybody else. And so we did, a year or two ago, we went and testified before the Board of Education. There was a few dozen historians, professional teachers, all telling and remember, these people are going to stand up to experts, so it doesn't matter that we brought professional historians and teachers to testify on this, to the effect that one of the textbooks that was being supported, for example, said that before the age of Enlightenment, I think it was, they said that people that lived in sub-Saharan Africa were a Hamitic people of the Negro race. It's actually the way the book worded it. And a number of people came up to protest that and said you can't use that kind of language, and explained why. I gave an explanation as to why, and I said one of the reasons that you can't call them a Hamitic race is because there was no Ham. These people are not descended from Noah. Noah didn't exist. There's a lot of references, of course, to Moses also, and don't tell the Board of Education that Moses didn't exist. It will generate a lot of hatred if you try to do that. So, my wife testified on that day, and she complained about bias, overt, open, obvious bias. And one of the board members who always challenges women when they are testifying against his position, and he tends to almost specifically do them, I've noticed this as a bias of his own. He complained that is a bias an error, expecting that she was going to question her own judgment. And she firmly said, yes, a bias is an error. And what I thought was terribly funny about that was that they didn't think to check that one thing when they were editing the books, because the textbook they approved describes a historical bias as an unreasoned emotional judgment about people and events, and it recommends that students check their sources for a frame of reference and examine the author's beliefs and look for biased language. Yeah. So, the Board of Education, they said, Then there's also a promotion of Christian religion. As I said, when mentioning the slaves, for example, where they wanted to call them anything else and wanted to spin everything any other way, they mentioned that the slaves accepted Christianity as if they had a choice, as if it seemed like a reasonable option. So it's just the way that it's being spun. We had an interview with Professor Robert Price, or I guess I should call him Dr. Robert Price. He's a professor of theology, also some expertise in history. And he said that there were cases that we were bringing to him that he wouldn't describe as necessarily false, but that he said that they were overgeneral and misleading because of inappropriate omissions. And here's a good one. The framers, this is in the Holt McDougall, American Heritage, the framers' political thinking was influenced by a Judeo-Christian religious heritage, which includes traditions common to both Judaism and Christianity. These religions see the law and individual rights as being of divine origin. And they want to say that the founding fathers, based the Constitution on the Ten Commandments. And this is what what these textbooks are specifically saying. Moreover, it continues, it says the framers benefited from the Protestant Reformation, a 16th century Christian reform movement whose leaders developed ideas about individual responsibility, the freedom to worship as one chooses, and self-government, which is completely against both the Ten Commandments and the prior statement about all the laws being of divine origin. Obviously, these laws were constructed by men. We know what sort of man-made laws that our nation was based on, and we know that it wasn't based on any aspect or any semblance of the Ten Commandments, reminding everybody that the first commandment violates the First Amendment, because it should be a capital offense, if we were based on the Ten Commandments, to worship any other god. It also, in the collection of commandments erroneously referred to as the 10, because there are actually several more than that in Exodus 20, going on through Exodus 24. It says that it's forbidden to make any kind of a rendering in any capacity or by any means of any recognizable thing in heaven or earth. And a lot of people interpret that to mean that you can't make false gods, but it says after that you can't worship these things. It says prior to that you can't make them at all. You can't make any rendering. And I think the reason is because the way that they used to make gods is the same way that gods used to make people. They would construct clay figurines, and then you would have a golem spell or some other kind of enchantment that would bring these things alive. This is obviously not what our country was based on. The idea that thou shalt not steal and thou shalt not kill are in there. Those are the only two that most people can remember. Those laws already existed everywhere prior to the dates given for the Ten Commandments. And then there are history books say that Moses was born in the 1200s, when biblical scholars have, according to Bob Price, long since given up on any chance of a historical Moses. And I told the Board of Education that Moses was no more historic than Robin Hood or King Arthur. And I had a number of people getting in my face about that. On the issue, it reminds me of the issue of racism. One of them was a man in uniform. We have a white man show up in uniform. He was thanked for his service. You had a Hispanic or Native American show up in full uniform, and they criticized him for inappropriate use of the uniform. Why the double standard? And I had some others. Hold on a sec. Oh, yeah. On the issue of American exceptionalism, it is, I think, important not that we paint some picture of what we want people to believe because we want to control what they believe and because we want to control how they vote, because that's what this is really all about. It's important to know what dark things have happened in the United States, not so that we would hate our country, but so that we can know, when you ask the question about how bad things can get, it's important to know how bad things have already been. Now, I had the advantage of studying a little bit of the history and watching a series of documentaries that came on, surprisingly, on the 4th of July. that was 8 one-hour episodes about what we did, what the United States did officially to the Native Americans, to the Mexicans, to the Jews, to the Catholics, to the Irish, to women, and so forth. These are ridiculous atrocities, like in the 1800s, for example. This was after the Civil War. There was made a law that it was illegal to hire Chinese immigrants in the state of California. How does 200 legislators not realize how unconstitutional this is? You know, the Constitution does not defend itself, and this is an example of that. It takes other people to stand up, raise their hand, and say, no, you can't do this, and this is why. Because 200 legislators who just happen to be the majority, with a silent minority or no present minority at the time, ruled arbitrarily that they're going to turn all this whole group of people into criminals by necessity, since they cannot legally have jobs, or must be forced to either go back to their home country or come to another state. So, and this is not going to be a long presentation, but one of the other things, as they said, was how our laws are based on the laws of Moses and the Ten Commandments. They said that Moses, and this is in the textbook, this out phrase, Moses calls for the law to apply equally to all people, even kings, and sets rules for a fair trial. And as I remember it, it wasn't for all people. It was a covenant between God and Israel only, and that there were all these special rules that applied only to Jews, right? You know, love your fellow Jew as yourself, which is often mistranslated as love your neighbor as yourself. It's not actually what that means. And that you cannot charge interest on loans to other Jews. And this is from the set of commandments that started in Exodus 20 and continued through Exodus 24. There are special rules for Jews all through that. So this is not, an egalitarian system that is supposed to be global. And of course, the fair trial comes down to, on the word of 1 or 2 witnesses, you are to be stoned to death, because that's the only punishment they had for anything. So, I'm hoping that this is a room full of activists, and that you have connections through other groups of activists. My wife became somewhat livid at the situation after we gave our testimony regarding history and the things that were being misrepresented about slavery, about race, promoting whites, promoting Christianity, and kind of suppressing or not mentioning all of these other things. And I know when I walk out of this room, I'm going to be angry at all the stuff I forgot. But she put together a coalition, and it includes the Atheist Community of Austin, El Paso Atheists, Freethought Oasis of Amarillo, Dallas-Fort Worth Coalition of Reason, and that is not just, it's all of them, but we wanted to make special mention of the Hispanic Secular Humanists of North Texas and Black Nonbelievers of Dallas. And then in addition, we have the Piney Woods Secular Outreach, Concerned East Texans for Separation of Church and State, Humanists of Houston, Corpus Christi Atheists, Southeast Texas Humanist Alliance, Freethought Association of Central Texas, and then statewide group Secular Student Alliance for Texas Colleges, and also the Texas Secular Homeschooling Network. All of these people are in unison on Facebook as the Texas Freethought Coalition. We'd like you to join us on Facebook so that we can plan our response to the textbooks that have already been passed. We've received our copies, and that are going to be distributed across the state. We have been trying to find someone who would represent Texas school children. We're in touch with a number of organizations about that for legal representation. We'll discuss more about that on Facebook. And one of the options, and I don't know how well this would play in Texas, because I've been to East Texas, and that's particularly egregious. In Colorado, they waged a Twitter campaign and a demonstration in schools where the students had a walkout and the teachers had a sick out to such numbers that they had to close the school for lack of available faculty. So the Texas Freethought Coalition also has a petition posted on change.org, and you can find that on the Facebook site as well. So please join us so that we can work out what we're going to do about this in the next year prior to the election. Thank you very much.